time to do the dumpster dive on Twitter. So Don Lemon got owned by this lady in pearls last night on CNN. I don't actually know who she is, but let's have a listen.
And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, 500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say, who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages? Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
It's an interesting discussion. I don't really know what to say to any of that shit because I don't even know any of that fucking shit happened. A lot of people who truly, truly believe that the only people who were ever enslaved were Black Americans. That African Americans were the only people that were ever enslaved. The Africans came over from Africa and they were enslaved here in America, and it's the only time that's ever happened in the history of the world. I mean, even if you look at the word slave, if you look at the etymology of the word slave, it comes from Slavs, as in Eastern Europeans. So even the word itself gives away who was probably enslaved the most. And of course, we all know that everybody in the world has been enslaved. Every race, color, creed has been enslaved. And you'd think that this would bring people together. You'd think that this would create a kind of unity between people to say, hey, once again, we're not dealing with a race war, we're dealing with a class war. There's always been people above us keeping us down, but no, we turned it into a race war. There was one comment that, really killed me. Let me pull it up here. This is a prime example of folks who don't read or study anything of history. And by history, he means he saw a TikTok video where somebody explained the difference between slavery and chattel slavery. Just an assertion of opinion to support their personal and racist ideology by making comments out of the context of what actually took place. Chattel slavery and indentured servitude are not the same. See, what did I tell you? He saw this on a TikTok video. There was a girl who was like, here's the difference between indentured servitude and chattel slavery. There are people who truly believe that every other instance of slavery, the slaves themselves were actually willing to be slaves. They were happily enslaved. So what they did was they said, hey, I owe you this debt. I will work for you for however many years, and then I'm free. They actually believe this is how this has worked since the dawn of humanity until the African American slaves. And people really don't see how brainwashed they are. So he says, the selling of your own people is not true. They're captured, not enslaved. I don't know what the fuck that means. Lots of slaves for the entire history of the world were captured slaves. That's actually where the word kidnapping comes from. That was from enslaving children. Allowed to live as citizens with limited rights and freedoms, okay? So I really want you to think about what this guy is saying. He's saying that all the other slaves were free, they just didn't have any rights. Sold without an understanding of what was happening. Every other slave knew what was happening. They made an agreement to sell themselves. Little 6-year-olds and 3-year-olds who were being sold into prostitution, they knew what it was. They knew what they was. They were just paying off their debts. Goddamn 5-year-olds, they eat too much fucking candy. Eat your vegetables, kids, or else you're gonna have to be a slave. But just remember, it's not as bad as chattel slavery. Stupid. Let's take a look at some true things about slavery, because not a lot of that is going around these days. In the ancient world, slaves were almost always captives from the era's endless wars of conquest. Captives? I don't understand. What do you mean by captives? I thought they made an agreement. They were forced to do all the heavy labor required for building and sustaining cities and towns, clearing forests, building roads, temples, and palaces, digging and transporting stone, hoeing fields, rowing galley ships, and marching to almost certain death in the front line of battle, but by choice. Don't forget that. Women, and often enough boy slaves, again, their own choice, had the task of servicing the sexual appetites of their masters, which I'm sure they enjoyed and were very thankful for. None of that changed with the arrival of the new millennium. Gaelic tribes took advantage of the fall of the Roman Empire to raid the west coast of England and Wales for strong bodies. One belonged to a 16-year-old later anointed St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland. St. Patrick was black. News to me. Everything on this planet, okay? You want to compare the African-American slaves to the ones in Egypt? You think they worked harder than those motherfuckers building those fucking pyramids? I don't even know how they did that shit. Ancient aliens? The aliens were even slaves, apparently, because ain't no fucking human being built that shit. If we were to give reparations for people's labor, for everything created, you know, the people are saying, like, well, they deserve reparations because there are people still to this day profiting off of what the slaves built. Everything in the world was built by slaves. We're all profiting off of the work of slaves. So how exactly do we do that? Do we just pass money around like a hot fucking potato, and whenever the music stops, that's who gets the reparations? It's asinine. It's asinine, okay? Let's read a little bit more about slavery, since a lot of people are very confused about the whole thing, about how the whole thing went down. Slavery was a normal state of affairs well beyond the territory we now call Europe. The Mayans had slaves. The Aztecs harnessed the labor of captives to build their temples and then serve as human sacrifices at the altars they had helped construct. So these motherfuckers would build the temple, and then they would cut their fucking head off and watch it roll down the temple they just built. But don't worry, they did it by choice to pay off their debts. From the 15th to the 18th centuries, the North African Barbary Coast was a hub for white slavery. Apparently we got to put that in quotation marks, like it's Puff the fucking Magic Dragon, like it's just a myth. This episode was relatively short-lived in the global history, let's just mention that, of slavery, but one with overlooked impact on Western culture. Around 1619, just as the first Africans were being sailed from the African coast to Jamestown, Algerian and Tunisian pirates, or corsairs as they were known, were using their boats to raid seaside villages on the Mediterranean and Atlantic for slaves who happened, in this case, to be white. Oh, they just happened to be white. They didn't enslave them because they were white, just because they just happened to be white. They were probably looking for African-American ones, but they just happened to be white. In 1631, Ottoman pirates sacked Baltimore on the southern coast of Ireland, capturing and enslaving the villagers. Around the same time, Iceland was raided by Barbary corsairs who took hundreds of prisoners, selling them into a lifetime of bondage. There was also white slavery in America at the same time as black slavery. There was white slavery in America well before black slavery. And no, they were not all indentured servants. I'm going to recommend a book. The book is called White Cargo. You can read all about it. There's another book called Without Indentures, Index to White Slave Children in Colonial Court Records. Richard Hayes Phillips has collected the names of more than 5,000 children kidnapped from Ireland, Scotland, England, and New England and sold into slavery in Maryland and Virginia, circa 1660 to 1720. By English law dated 1659, it was lawful for justices of the peace to kidnap children found begging or vagrant and ship them to the plantations as servants without indentures. There's so much white slavery, but we just keep it very hush-hush. Slavery had been gradually disappearing from France and England by the 12th century, but less because those civilizations were developing a modern conception of universal human rights than because tribes were coalescing into cities and nations that were finding less appalling ways to harness cheap labor. And there it is. At the end of the day, the big question is, did we really ever abolish slavery? I mean, like, actual slavery we still have all over the world, but the only reason you had the Brits abolishing slavery, I imagine, was because of the Industrial Revolution, where they were like, hey, we can get the slaves to kind of just work the factories, and they believe that they're completely free men. So we don't actually have to enslave them anymore. They come in every day, they do their work, give them 7 fucking cents, and these people think they're free. And they say please and thank you, and then they ask to work overtime. Really, did slavery end? Not so much. Instead of looking for reparations for things that happened in the past, maybe we need some reparations for the shit that's going on right now. Okay, maybe we need to turn that motherfucker around, band together, all of us slaves, because that's what we all are. None of us are more special than the others. We should all band together and turn around and whip these motherfuckers. Maybe they should do some bootlicking for the first time in their miserable fucking lives. All right, guys, that's it for me today. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all soon. Okay.